Hi. Tonight I'm going to go over a trial that was done on testosterone. I told you I was going to go through a trial called the Traverse trial because it's really important for us to understand just how important testosterone is and just how the medical community will often twist things, maybe not often, more than likely in all their trials, they will twist things to suit what they think will make them the most money. So if you've heard of the Traverse trial, great, but the headlines you've seen are probably not so great, and we're going to go through it and break it down so that it's very easy to understand what's going on, and I'm going to give you a little background. But before I do that, I'm going to tell you I never use notes typically in a video, but I do have notes tonight. I just have a little post-it note here with some numbers and statistics from the Traverse trial because it's brand new, and I don't know it by heart yet like I will in the future. So if you'll forgive me, I am going to look at some notes as we go through tonight. But I want to start this by saying, remember, you've heard me say it more than once already, but there are more testosterone receptors in a man's heart and in a woman's heart than any other place in the body. There have been study after study after study that shows that having optimal testosterone levels, typically using what would be considered by the medical community high-dose testosterone, reduces the risk of coronary artery disease, coronary vascular events, heart attacks, strokes, pulmonary embolisms, atrial fibrillations, or irregular heartbeats. I mean, all those, chronic kidney disease is improved. So all those things have been shown in multiple studies to be improved when somebody has more or optimal testosterone levels. Now, the other thing that's obviously better when people have optimal testosterone levels is their muscle mass. And we've gone through the importance of muscle, and it's your bank account for aging. And I gave you the study, I think it was out of the University of San Francisco, California, about, the muscle suggests that working out on a regular basis can protect against Alzheimer's. We went through that and those memory issues. But there has been like a war on testosterone, especially for men, somewhat in women, but especially for men over the last, 20 or 30 years. And I'm not sure if you're, privy to what's going on, so I want to give you a little background so this will make more sense to you. So what's happened is, we hear these folks in the medical community and other places in the political world that will say, well, that testosterone makes a man, dangerous. Testosterone is toxic. They're sexist. There's all kind of things that they'll say. And what has happened is that not too many years ago at all, the average normal, what was considered, quote, normal testosterone level in men with LabCorp, I believe was 1,572 or 1,592. It was one of the two, was the upper limit of testosterone for men. Now it's in the 900s, and I have been told by somebody that works at LabCorp that the upper limit for men is getting ready to go into the 700s. I cannot verify that. That's what a lab technician that I know very well told me, that they're going to go from 9, whatever it is. Again, I didn't look and I don't remember exactly, but from that 900 number to 700. So let's assume they do that. That would essentially cut the high 1500s in half or less. And they've already cut it by a third, right, going to 900. So you understand that what would have been considered normal testosterone 10, 15, 20 years ago would now be considered toxic testosterone levels, or not toxic, but super, what the medical folks would say is super physiologic levels. Here's the problem with that. There is no data to say that there is any harm in doing this. Now, we're not trying to dose like some of these athletes would do and do those things where their head grows, 3 hat sizes and things. That's not what this is about. This is about what we would consider optimal testosterone levels for a man or a woman. The numbers for the women have dropped also. But for the purpose of this trial and what we're talking about with the Traverse study, we're going to talk about men because there were only men in the study. But that being said, having optimal testosterone levels is critical for both men and women. It's an antidepressant, it's good for the muscles we've talked about, it's good for the heart we've talked about, it's good for the kidneys we've talked about, it's just good for the way you feel, it's good for the way you look, it's good for everything that we can think of that we would probably say, yeah, I want more of that. It's good for sexual function. I mean, just the list goes on and on. So, the Traverse trial. I have to write some of this down, like I say, because it's brand new, and just the title itself is a disaster for me to try to remember. But the Traverse trial stands for Testosterone Replacement Therapy for the assessment of long-term adverse vascular events and efficacious response in hypogonadal men. You understand why I need a note for that? I mean, so here's what they were trying to do. They set out, their goal was to prove that testosterone would cause more coronary events in men. That's what they're trying to show, because again, this there's a crowd of people in the medical field that say, hey, it's toxic. We shouldn't be using it. So they tried to show that it was causing more vascular events like heart attacks, pulmonary embolisms, strokes, blood clots, those kind of things in men with low testosterone. So the Traverse trial took men between 45 and 80 years old, and they had to have a pre-existing heart disease or cardiovascular disease or big risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Things like high C-reactive protein was one of those risk factors. You all had that measured coming through this 30-day to maximum fat loss by Kim, because she ordered it for you. So these are really important numbers, and they know it. Coronary artery calcium scores were one of the risk factors. That's something that we can talk about later, but something that I don't know of any physician's office who is recommending that people get some of these tests. Now, you didn't have that done. That's different than a blood draw, but we can talk about why it's so important later. So they had either pre-existing heart disease, cardiovascular disease, or they were at a very high risk. They had to have 3 big risk factors for that. The average age was 63 years old. The average BMI was 35. That means these people are obese plus, okay? Obese plus. And they had an average testosterone, these are men, of 227. So what I'm getting at is these were sick folks. These are not healthy folks. They had really, really low testosterone levels. They either had heart disease or were at a very high risk for heart disease, and they were very obese. So we can imagine that this was not a healthy group we were testing, which is another thing that they will use these type of folks, because then they can say, well, there were more heart attacks or more strokes or whatever. But they used an inferior dose of testosterone in these folks. So here's what they did. They used a median dose of 65 milligrams, and they raised their levels between 350 and 750. So they got their levels from an average of 227 to only 350 to 750. I don't know if anybody got to 750, but that was the parameters of the trial. The biggest increase in any man was an increase of 148 nanograms per deciliter. So they went between 350. They wouldn't go above 750, which, remember, maybe that's where this new norm is coming from that the LabCorp tech is telling me. Maybe it's because of this. I don't know. But 350 to 750, the average testosterone was started at 227, and then the median testosterone during the trial was 380. I don't think I wrote it down, but it was just shy of 400. So they only raised the levels between 34 nanograms per milliliter and 312 nanograms per milliliter with an average, I might have said with a maximum, but an average of 148 nanograms per milliliter. So if you took 227 and 148, we didn't go up very far, right? So what happens is they found that the placebo group, they gave half the men testosterone, too low of a dose, especially for where their levels were. Half the men, just a blank cream, right? And the placebo group had more cardiovascular events than the testosterone group. So even with an inferior dose and inferior levels, they still found that the testosterone group had less coronary events. It was coronary, it was cardiovascular mortality, so dying from some kind of heart attack or stroke or blood clot event, and a non-fatal myocardial infarction or heart attack, and a non-fatal stroke. So the testosterone group, even with those low levels, had less of these things. So testosterone actually passed the test that I believe the trial was set out for it not to pass. Now, here's the headlines though that some of these folks are saying. They say that they observed this. They did not study for this. It was not part of the study. It's just something that they're pulling out of observations. That's what they tell us. So they observed that some in the testosterone group had atrial fibrillation, had acute kidney disease, not chronic, acute kidney disease, and there was a third one, atrial fib, acute kidney disease, and pulmonary embolism, so a blood clot that goes to the lungs. What they fail to tell you when they look at some of those folks that were on the testosterone, and it is true, some of the folks that were not getting the placebo did have some of these events, but remember, it was less than those not getting it. But what they fail to tell us is when you read through the study, this study was done during the latest virus attack that was out there. And I'm going to call it an attack because I believe it was released from a lab on the population, okay? You can agree or disagree, but I believe that all the evidence shows that. I believed it from day one, and I believe it's been documented. So, these are sick, obese men with terrible testosterone levels. What they fail to tell us is during the COVID problems, the viral problems, what would these men have taken? They would have taken the shots. I'm not even going to use the V word because it's not. It was a toxic shot. It was a series of toxic shots. We don't know how many of these men took these shots and how many of these toxic shots they took. But if we look at this population of the age and the health levels, they would have all been very informed to get those toxic shots. Now, what do those toxic shots lead to more of? Heart disease like atrial fibrillation, right? We're seeing it over and over and over in the studies, and we have from early on. We're seeing acute kidney disease from the spike protein, right? And we're seeing a lot of blood clots, pulmonary embolisms. So they want to blame it on the testosterone leg rather than blaming it on the real cause. Number one, these people are obese, low testosterone levels, probably inactive, or they wouldn't, or somewhat inactive, or they probably wouldn't be in this trial because they wouldn't have met the parameters, who already had a risk of heart disease, who already had a risk of stroke, who already had all these factors going against them. And then you add on a spike protein shot or series of shots, and then you go, oh, the testosterone caused them to have this, even though the study itself showed that the testosterone group had less than the placebo group. So the headlines, though, that you may have read or may see, especially on social media if you're on there, is, oh, testosterone therapy caused more atrial fibrillation, acute kidney disease, and pulmonary embolism in the TRAVERSE trial. When the real cause, when you really get down and read the study, when you really look at the study, they weren't even measuring any of that in this group. They were measuring, did they have more coronary vascular events or deaths, coronary vascular cardiovascular, mortality or death, non-fatal myocardial infarction or non-fatal stroke. They were not looking for AFib, they were not looking for acute kidney disease, and they were not looking for pulmonary embolism. They just observed that in some in the group. Some in the group of the testosterone folks had that, some in the group of the non-testosterone folks had that. But that's the headlines that they take and run with to try to get to their endpoint of testosterone being toxic. Makes us toxic, makes us dangerous. So that's where they were going. So I want you to understand how they will manipulate things, how they do it all the time with numbers. They will use these things and try to say, look, we're right. We were right from day one. They do it all the time with statin drugs. They do it all the time with arthritis drugs. They do it all the time with blood pressure drugs. This is common. I mean, I could give you so many examples of things like this when you actually understand how to sit down and have access and read the entire study, how they do this, how they pull numbers from, sometimes you don't even know where they pull the numbers from. But I'll give you another really quick example of how they do this. So there was a Jupiter trial on Crestor and Crestor's reduction of heart attacks. I don't have the numbers in front of me, I didn't review them, but I know them well enough to tell you this. So in the placebo leg of that Crestor study versus the Crestor leg, the placebo leg had 3 heart attacks and per 100 people, and the Crestor group had 2 heart attacks per 100 people. So we had 2 heart attacks in the Crestor group per 100, 3 heart attacks in the placebo group per 100. So if you look at that, that is 1% less heart attack, right? Because it's 2 out of 100 and 3 out of 100. So it's 2% in the Crestor group, 3% in the placebo group. But what the headlines say and what the studies, they printed it, they brought it to the pharmacies, they brought it to the doctors, was the 33% less heart attacks in the Crestor group. Now, it is 1/3 less out of 100, but that is called the relative risk. The absolute risk was 1 heart attack per 100 people treated for 5 full years with an absolutely, what I believe is a toxic poison to our cell drug. So that's the kind of things you get. It didn't say, hey doc, we can save 1 out of 100 people from a heart attack over 5 years of treatment at a high cost with all these side effects. It said we're going to reduce heart attacks by 33%. Crestor did it in the Jupiter study. That's awesome. I mean, I get it. If I thought that I could reduce heart attacks by 33%, I'd be ecstatic and want to talk about that too. But it's just not true. It was actually 1 out of every 100 for 5 years. So you see how they take that 1% and turn it into 33%? They use the relative risk of 33% instead of the absolute risk of 1%. And so it seems like it's a blockbuster drug. Heart attacks are the #1 cause of heart disease, the #1 cause of death in the United States. When I can teach you, and am teaching you, you just maybe don't realize it, how to reduce the risk of all heart attacks by 82%, and we won't use any drugs to do it. And that's studied very well, and we'll talk about it in another video because I know I went long on this one probably already, but this is really important for you to get how these studies are manipulated. One of the former editors of, it was either the American JAMA, I think it was Journal of American Medical Association or British Medical Journal, one of the big well-known things that the doctors get their information from. When she resigned, and as she left her post, she said, you can't trust any. I may be paraphrasing a little bit, but this is what she meant. This is essentially what she said. You can't trust any of the data coming from the drug companies. I can tell you, I could have told her that 33 years ago. I figured that out a long time ago, okay? So again, we may go through some more of these as we go, but just know there's a lot of this going on. Don't be scared of testosterone. Don't be scared of what your doctor or other doctors may say is high-dose testosterone. Just know that the real studies show no negative effects for using optimal doses and getting to optimal levels of testosterone. Now, we're of course talking about using bioidentical compounded testosterone cream and not shots, okay? Shots are, I'm not saying they're wrong, but they are not bioidentical to our body. They're different salt forms. Your body's not made to get a big dose on Monday and then another dose the next Monday. You get these highs and lows like a roller coaster versus putting it on the way your body would make it, some every day. That's what we prefer with the creams. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this gets you thinking a little bit. That's really what I want y'all to do as good CEOs. I want you to think. I want you to question things. I want you to learn to sort through the headlines, and I'm going to do my best to help you. Thanks again. Can't wait to see you next time.